And we're going away at a time where my son Aaron, the priest and prophet of our family, lives in London and is married to a Jewess, and we have three little Jewish granddaughters, and they are experiencing tremendous persecution. And it's very difficult to know at what place we are in human history. Now, a lot of people think they know. I don't know that. To me, at least, the Bible doesn't make it perfectly clear where we are. But I think to myself, here are these beautiful little girls, you know, the eldest is just 6. Might only be 5. 5, yeah. So like 5, 3 and 1. Yeah. And you'd wonder what they'd ever do to deserve persecution, wouldn't you? And easy to persecute people when they're so small and we're so big. And we're the holders of the power. So you might pray for our visit there. It's a big deal for us to get out the airport, get ourselves on the plane for a start, and then get off. Well, you've got to get off. They'll kick you off in the air, won't they? You won't be able to stay. You won't say, I'm staying here. But God has been particularly kind to us. Somewhere along the line, when I became born again, and it became obvious to my kids and grandkids that we were born again, they continued to buy me for Christmas certain holy objects. I would have one of the greatest collections of 2 hands praying over a Bible that you've ever seen. But one of the presents one of them gave me was a picture of the head of Christ. And when you turn it, there comes the crucified head of Christ. Normal head, crucified head, normal head. Very spooky. And but often when I pray before the crucified head of Christ, not the picture, that mental image I have. And every time we receive communion, it forces us to ask ourselves the question, what am I doing? What's this about? What does it mean? And we've got people from every length and breadth of belief system concerning communion. And I grew up Catholic, and so it would, let me tell you, if we were here and all the communion breads were dropped on the floor, many Catholic people would get on their hands and knees to pick them up. And they'd consume all of those elements so that they wouldn't go to waste. One of the things I found difficult when because it was tremendously ceremonial when you received your first communion. You had a party, all the girls dressed in bridesmaids' dresses and you dressed in a little bow tie. You walked under some sort of arboreum, or I did, of flowers and all of that. And it was very, very special moment. And when I first came into the experience of Pentecost, I found the experience of communion quite different. I found kids receive communion whenever they could get their hands on it. And they would come and they would just receive communion, and it would just be like a natural part of living. I understand both approaches and both of them have merit. But we come to receive communion. Here we are in this room, the dozen or so of us who are here, and we're going to receive communion together. And I believe it has the ability, the power and God's intention to change our life. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. So you can't please God without faith. So I encourage you to release your faith as we receive communion together. Oh. I'm missing it. And there's something about the ancient prayers of the Bible that ring out through history. There's something about hearing these words. David Clark and I mightn't exactly think the same about communion, but what we would agree on is that somehow Jesus is present. Now, how he's present? We wouldn't be having vehement disagreement, but I'm just saying we might think the same thing. So remember that he's present. And if God's present, stuff could happen. There's been times throughout human history where there was a Dutch girl called Therese Newman who lived for 25 years on communion bread. And everyone was watching her to make sure she wasn't sneaking a pork pie. But they never caught her doing that. There were many times where, as the priest would hold the communion bread up, it would begin to bleed. These are well documented. There is in Naples, the patron saint of the city of Naples is called Saint Generius, and they have his blood and some other things in like an urn, and once a year on his birthday it liquefies. Now, you don't have to believe any of that, but I'm saying God's not about. He said these signs shall follow those who believe. I was coming to church tonight and I had a phone call from a man who I ministered to. He first came to a restore here many years ago, and I ministered to, and I knew something about what was happening in his life that I couldn't have possibly known. And he was impacted because that's what spiritual gifts are about, to bring about change and impact. And he had to say to me, well, God told you that. Of course you couldn't have known it. On his last night, when Jesus was betrayed, who has ever experienced betrayal in their life? Has anyone been betrayed? Just me? More than one? Yeah. And some of the betrayal can be very deep and wounding and go for years. On the night he was betrayed, and you imagine Jesus sitting there, he's looking out into the audience, and there his betrayer Judas is. And Jesus is determined that he's not going to pass away with anything against anybody. So on the night he was betrayed, Jesus took bread and he broke it. And he gave it to his friend and said, take and eat it, for this is my body that's eaten. At the end of the meal, Jesus took a cup, filled it with wine, passed it to his friends and said, "Take this and drink it, because this is the cup of my blood, the blood of a new and everlasting covenant." Listening to you. While we're away, David and Linda will be looking after things. We trust them not to sell the church.
That's the glass. That's the council.
You get a good price for it.
It could be something.
You just might remember us in your prayers while we're away. We arrive back 10th of January. One of the things, like Tanya and I have had the privilege of going to Israel twice, and we've been from one length of the country to the other, which is about 400 miles, I think, and across where, if you stand on Mount Carmel, Bob, you can see one side of the country to the other. You can see. So, what?
It's a little strip, isn't
And we went to lots and lots and lots of the expected sites. One of the most unexpected sights that you would see there, I went to this site and saw Benedict pick a fight with the horse driver, really.
With a what? Can't you think of him?
Benedict picked a fight with the horse driver in the Jordanian city of Petra. Do you remember that?
I do, son was involved, yes. Yes, I remember that.
So Petra is the city that we see in Indiana Jones, where he comes down the ravine, and there is the city of Petra. But Petra was a series, it's like hundreds and hundreds of tombs carved into the wall. And they're quite impressive, very impressive actually, until you go in them and find out they're like the old American wood front houses. There's nothing in them, just a wall at the front and a very small little chamber for a coffin, I guess, in the back. So we see all these things, and one of the things that we saw, we were baptised in the Jordan River, great experience being baptised in the Jordan River, and it has these particular little fish there that clean any fungus off your feet as they're nibbling on you all the time. And the water of the Jordan is slimy.
Muddy, dirty,
And,
not very.
but you wouldn't get an infection out the Jordan, would you?
Well, we didn't.
No. But the point, the Jordan has 3 rivers that begin it, or 3 tributaries, and then they run into the river, and then they run into, I think, the Dead Sea. At times, very significant events happened about the Jordan River and the crossing of the Jordan River. It's very significant in the fact that it represents barriers and represents obedience and represents the way Israel was meant to go. So in 2 Kings chapter 2, Elijah comes up to the Jordan and he takes his mantle off, which is like a cloak that goes across his face. He takes that across and hits the river, and the waters part. Well, that's going to get your attention. And he crosses over the river. And then he says, Elijah says to Elisha, who has been his sidekick, Elijah has mentored him for between 7 and 10 years. And Elijah was a strange one, he was strange. And Elijah goes up to him and says, because they all know Elijah's going to be taken up in there. They all know it. And there are companies of prophets that lived around that area. They knew it too. And that's why we see across denominations, we see them hearing the voice of God. Because the voice of God is universally going out. If Bob buys a Bible, he can buy a Bible. Now he can go to Tunisia and buy a Bible. He can go to Timbuktu and buy a Bible. The Word of God is consistent and goes out. And God says, this is my word's not going to come back to me void. It's going to achieve what I want it to do. So when Susie is feeling off colour and she hears the word of the Lord saying, by my stripes you have been healed, that word is the right word for her, the word in season. And he says to Elisha, what gift can I give you? Well, Elisha's not backward and coming forward. He said, I'll have a double portion of the blessing that's on you. I've seen you in action. I want to be more in action. And Elijah said to him, this is a hard thing, yours. So when I am taken up, I'll try and leave my mantle behind for you. And when a whirlwind comes and horses of fire, a fiery chariot, Elijah says, my father, the chariot of Israel. And then he disappeared. And he took his own clothes and tore them in two, but then found the mantle. And Elisha picks the mantle up and goes to the Jordan and smacks the water, and the water passes. He says, where is the Lord God, Elijah? Where is he? Elijah, we've shared about him a few times because you have to, because he's a giant figure in the history of Israel. And miracle worker, confronter of kings, destroyer of false prophets. And there he is. He came from a city called Tishbe, which is like a little mountain place. And he came in, and he came into the kingdom of Ahab, walked up to Ahab and said, it's not going to rain, except by my word. Well, that sounds smart until you're the king, you're sitting there and years later it still hasn't rained. And he has various experiences in God. And he came under the wicked sway of Jezebel. Now we hear about Jezebel, and what people do is, well, you're a Jezebel, you're a Jezebel, you're a Jezebel. It's not like that. Jezebel is an archetype, is a spiritual principality. that has certain methods of operating. And she's the daughter of Iqbal, the leader of the Carthaginians, and she finds herself in Israel, and she comes in, she builds a temple to Astarte in Jezreel. She built a commune and supported 450 priests of Baal. She built a temple in Samaria. She tore down the altars of Jehovah on Carmel and replaced them with shrines and groves. Groves were like groups of trees in line that were sort of places dedicated to demonic gods. She begins to persecute the priests and prophets of Jehovah throughout the land. And she was a woman with a fury. Here comes Elijah. Elijah encounters some of the most exciting things that would ever take place in the history of Israel. After he'd been serving God 5 or 10 years, he picks up a young man that God has ordained to work with him. And you may remember, or you may not, that Elijah walks past Elisha, who was out with his team of oxen ploughing, and Elijah threw a coat over him. And Elisha said, "What are you doing?" And so, in the end, Elisha burnt the yoke for the oxen and sacrificed the oxen and came to follow him. See, you're going to have to choose who you hang around. You're going to, you got limited time. And you got to be careful who you give that time to. When I became a Christian, I became a Christian, out of the most broken circumstances. And I didn't want to be hanging around with people as broken as me, because I knew they couldn't help me. Because if you can't help yourself, you're not going to help someone else, are you? So I particularly, and I'm conscious of it now more than ever, I wanted to hang around people who had something that they could offer me and call me unto greater things. I hung around with a man called Brian Carmody, who was a dear friend to me, like a dear friend to Tanya. And I met him because he came to a retreat, and he came with a woman he was interested in, but who wasn't for him. She had an encounter with God at this retreat and dropped him. And he was heartbroken. He was speechless. And I used to meet him, listen to this, every Tuesday night. And he used to buy me Chinese food. Now this happened for years and years and years. And I led him to Christ. He had an encounter with Christ. He then went as a Catholic man to Mass every day for 25 years. So he had something to teach me, didn't he? About commitment, about being faithful to your word. He owned a little flat at Manly, and he'd ring Tanya and I up and say, "Would you like to use the flat?" Well, it was a bolt hole for us. We knew every shop in Ringamore. And he just was at Manly, collapsed in the street and died. 3 years ago, probably. Then I met another man, Dr. Richard Hibbert, who was the president of the Missionary and the principal of the Missionary and Alliance Bible College. author of many books. He was a doctor of medicine who after passing medicine, he had an encounter with God and never practiced medicine, but went to Romania to work among Romanian gypsies for 20 years. And I went to Tasmania with Tanya and met him in Tasmania, and he used to come, we used to see him many times a year. He'd come and take Tanya and I to lunch and we'd talk about the things of God. He wrote many books, and he had a triple doctorate. So he had a doctor of medicine, a doctor of theology, and a doctor of something else. One of the finest men I ever met, and a tremendous supporter who could speak truth into your life. 2 years ago, he died of liver failure. And a third man was Dr. Tom Gardner, who Tanya and I brought him and his wife to Australia, author of best-selling books, Healing the Wounded Heart, Grace Towards Mercy. I would speak to Tom 2 or 3 times a week, and I would open my life to him. Because you see, sometimes you've got to open your life externally, where people can get a good look who know you. So he ministered to me for years. I brought him here, ministered at LL, ministered in this church many, many times. Last year, he died of kidney failure. So, I'm currently in the process of a search to anchor my heart with somebody. Don't get frightened. And here in this place, I had a good friend, Peter Higgins, who used to drive me everywhere. We used to go everywhere in the car together. And he died, I think, 3 years ago now.
Oh, longer than that.
And longer.
Oh, quite a lot. Yeah, way before COVID.
So you need to surround yourself with sound thinkers who will speak the truth to you. And you'll hear the truth out of their mouth. Well, they'll call you under greatness. You need to hang around positive people. You don't need to hang around everyone and tell you why something won't work. You need to hang around people who are accomplishing something with their lives, so that you will. You need to hang around winners, so that you can become a winner. You don't want to hang around with a bunch of complaining, griping, whining people who don't want to do anything, or want to have a go at you if you want to do something. A lot of what you have to do in the spiritual life is alone. My quality prayer comes alone. No one's there doing the responses, alone. And in 2 Kings it said, you saw Elijah took his own clothes. He's walking around with a mantle with his clothes wrapped in it. He'd face Ahab in the royal courts alone. He'd watch at a brook named Cherith, where he's waiting for ravens to bring his food alone. He'd meet the widow of Zarephath and have to ask her for a last cruse of oil and handed meal. He would face death and pray for a dead child and say, come back to life. He'd face the priests of Baal with sharpened swords and put them to death. he'd have to marshal the people to kill the prophets of Baal. No matter how you look at it, there must be times in your life when you're willing to face down the calamities of life alone. That's why private prayer and relationship with God is important. I'm married to a woman who has a deep relationship with God, but her relationship won't carry me, and my relationship won't carry her. See, Elisha is not going to get anywhere because he can see something in his mind. He's going to do something because he's going to pursue it. See, it's very easy when we sit in this room together not to believe that God can do anything with us. I would say to you, I don't know what your prayer life is like. I don't know what your fasting life is like. But I happened to go to a funeral last week, I think, of Dawn Alston. And her husband, David Alston, has pastored Living Hope in the Mountains for about as long as we've been here. And he was able to transcribe 40 teaching tapes onto my iPod so I can listen to them on the plane. And I'm talking to him, and he had been married over 50 years, and at his wife's funeral he said to me, "This is a day you never hope that you're going to see." And then I've spoken to him several times over the past couple of weeks, and at times he'll cry. You know, just tears will well up and he'll cry. But most of the time, I'd have to tell you, he's rejoicing, because she has her end. Now, the challenge for you and me is that we continue to our end till we hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Aren't you longing to hear those words? Well done, good and faithful servant. Because often my image of myself, I have not had an image where I'm saying well done about anything. But in this time of grace we find ourselves, where we put on the news and it's terrible, where we see what the TV's got to show us, and yet we know, as I saw films in the last few weeks about the Blitz of London and how terrible it was, and how they had to put all the kids on the trains and get them out of the city, but London is still there, and the British spirit is still there. And so whatever they didn't finish London. And whatever the devil's done, he hasn't finished us. May his name be praised. Can we sing that song, Graves in the Gardens, please?